My name is Tim Mintner. I work for XTreme Consulting. I am local to the Austin area. Lived in the area for almost 5 years.
This week.
This week, yes. I've moved away and back, and so that's why they're giving me trouble. How many of you are running VMware in your environment today? Okay, actually, most of you. Good, good, good. At XTreme, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the company in a second. A lot of our organization used to work for a division within Microsoft called the Solution Accelerator team. If you ever used a tool called Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, or you've used MAP or offline VM patching, those were all tools that were created by the Solution Accelerator team. And now, a little over a year ago, Microsoft decided they didn't need a Solution Accelerator team anymore and basically transferred some of those products over to different divisions, but got rid of that Solution Accelerator team. So what we did, since we provided a lot of the contractors, contract developers, all the documentation and things like that for the Solution Accelerator team, we realized that there was still a need, there were still gaps in the product lines that needed to be filled. So instead of doing that on Microsoft's behalf, we decided to take some of that and internalize that and release it on our own. So we want to talk with you today about the first product that we have that does that, and that's our XTreme VM Migrator. So let me jump in. So a little bit about the company, and you guys have to do this because we bought lunch, but you have to sit through a quick sales presentation before we get into the technical details. So we're primarily a consulting organization and a staffing organization. So a lot of what XTreme does is about 90% of the work we do. We have about 700 employees throughout the company. Is we do direct contract work for Microsoft. So if you've ever read a white paper, if you've ever taken a Microsoft online course, if you've ever attended MMS, if you were at TechEd and you went to any of the client track, those were all XTreme employees doing that work. So we do a lot of work behind the scenes for Microsoft. We just recently have gotten into external consulting work outside of Microsoft. Oh, this was running automatically. So like I said, we have a lot of good customers. We've done a little bit of work for Dell here locally, mainly in conjunction with Microsoft with that. So one of the things that we have provided, and I'm going to keep this from running automatically, is one of the solutions that we've created was our virtualized lab solution. How many of you have ever gone to MMS in the past few years? Yeah, okay. Did you take any hands-on labs? Yeah, or instructor-led labs. All of those were run on the back end by XTreme Consulting. So just to give you a little bit of experience of what we have around Hyper-V, we were basically given, on the last MMS, we were given a little over $4 million worth of equipment from HP, from Fusion.io, and from 3PAR, and they were basically said, make this sing. So we were able to set up all of the Hyper-V, the whole private cloud infrastructure that ran all of MMS, basically 2 racks of servers. And it was an amazing system. We had 16 blades that were running 192 gig of RAM each. They all had Fusion.io cards in them, tying into a 3PAR backend. And we were able to run at any one point in time. There would be well over 1,500 to 2,000 VMs running at any one point in time. MMS is kind of a unique challenge because, especially instructor-led labs, you've got 400 machines in the back of the room that every hour, all of those virtual machines have to be shut down, and then within 15 minutes later, all new virtual machines. So 400 machines running virtual machines connecting to a cloud infrastructure that each one of those 400 computers will fire up between 2 and 10 virtual machines. So at any point in time, we could have 3,000, 4,000 virtual machines that need to be stood up within a 10-minute period of time. So we did a lot of manipulation in order to make that happen and make it sing, but it worked really well. In fact, at the end of the conference, we decided to after everybody went home on Friday, we were like, okay, let's see what we can do here. So we're like, before we shut down all the equipment and ship it all back to HP and 3PAR and all the companies, let's see what we can do with it. So we started firing up virtual machines. And we just kicked off a script to see, let's see how many virtual machines we can get up and running on our solution at any one point in time. We hit a little over 8,100 virtual machines before we ran out of memory. So basically on 16 hosts, we had 8,000 virtual machines, which is just incredible. So we definitely have a lot of experience. We've filed tons of bugs and information back to Hyper-V and VMM and those teams because just the scale in which we run. Now what we have done is taken that same solution, and we have a hosted lab environment that we run this for customers. And some of the customers that we do this for is Microsoft. So if you've ever taken a Microsoft online learning course or taken any Microsoft learning courses from a local provider, chances are they're connecting up to our backend system in order to run that. And that's something that you can run within your organization if you wanted to do training. A little bit of stats. We've launched well over 1 million labs. We host roughly about 1,500 lab sessions per day in that solution that runs in our data center. And each one of those labs, like I said, can contain anywhere from 2 to 10 virtual machines. And so we're running all that on our backend system today. So that gives you some types of experience that we've had around the Hyper-V space. So let's talk a little bit about Hyper-V. Hyper-V is no longer a second-class citizen in the virtualization space. Now, back a few years ago, VMware was really the only game in town. It was the only real solution. Microsoft released, who used virtual server? Yeah, probably in your own test environment or something like that, but it was really a very weak hypervisor product. I mean, it wasn't even really a hypervisor. It wasn't much more than like a VMware client running on that solution. So it wasn't a real solution. And then it got a little bit better in Windows Server 2008. Got a lot more stable in 2008 R2, but when 2012 and now 2012 R2, it's now really fully on par with VMware. In fact, if you look at a feature by feature comparison or a scalability comparison, they're really neck and neck. In fact, Microsoft had virtualized SAN solutions before VMware did, so they beat VMware to the market in that space. VMware had virtualized networking, and then Hyper-V caught up, and so there's this kind of tit-for-tat competition that's going on between the two. But really, when you look at it feature by feature, it's about the same. So when you look at the storage capabilities, any individual virtual machine can run up to 64 virtual processors, can do 1 terabyte of memory in that. So it's really quite impressive. Some ideas of performance. I hear this a lot when I talk with customers is we don't really want to run our SQL servers on a virtualized platform because we don't want to take the performance hit. Well, this shows you an example that with SQL Server 2012, I can have 64 virtual CPUs with over 6 times performance over previous versions of Hyper-V with Server 2012 R2. The only overhead was basically 6.3%. So you had a 6% overhead of running it virtualized versus non-virtualized. Now, in some organizations, that could be a big deal, especially oil and gas or something like that. But for most organizations, you're not even going to notice that 6%. So there's really no reason not to run it virtualized. Some ideas on Exchange workloads. So Exchange environment, we've got 48,000 simulated users on a Hyper-V host with across 12 virtual machines with very low response times associated with that. But quite honestly, when you get into the difference between VMware and Hyper-V, the only reason really why people are looking to switch comes down to cost. And so this slide pretty much sums up the reason why most organizations, in fact, Gartner has stated that now well over 50% of the organizations, and by the end of this year, it'll be over 90% of Fortune 500 companies will be running both Hyper-V and VMware in their environment. So they're looking at the trend is starting to switch. Hyper-V's now got, in terms of the Fortune 500 space, a little over 50% market share within that. That doesn't mean they're not running VMware as well, but people are looking at both Hyper-V and VMware in their environment. But when you break down the license cost, it's really quite drastic. So the biggest difference in licensing is whenever I license VMware, and I've got VMware ESX, I've got vCenter, if I'm properly licensing Windows within my VMware environment, I'm already paying for Hyper-V, because what you do is you license Windows Server Data Center Edition for your VMware host. Now when you do that, it gives you unlimited guest licenses, so you can run however many guests that you want. Now when you run unlimited guests, that means unlimited. I mean, it doesn't cost you anything. All you have to do is pay for that one license. Now if you're doing that for your VMware environment, you've already bought Hyper-V. So you already paid for your virtualization solution, and you're essentially paying twice. If you're monitoring your servers with Operations Manager or patching your servers with Configuration Manager, guess what? You already own System Center. If you own System Center, now you can run Virtual Machine Manager. Now you can run Orchestrator. So those other tools you're already paying for your entire virtualization solution. You're just not utilizing it. You're just paying the extra money on top of that to run VMware. And really, when you break it down into cost, one license, and this is retail price licenses of a Windows Server Data Center Edition with System Center components in it, is roughly about $3,600. When you do the same sort of comparison to a VMware ESX with basically their data center product, it's $11,495. So the cost difference is significant. We were talking with a customer recently that had almost 1,000 VMware hosts in their organizations that they were licensing to. When we broke down the difference in price in their environment between VMware and Hyper-V, they were going to save over a 3-year period of time $80 million. $80 million. So their payback on a migration was 6 months. So it's insane, the difference. Now, if you are interested in kind of running through the numbers yourself, Microsoft has released a great tool. It's called the Data Center TCO tool. So it's a link down there at the bottom, datacentertcotool.com. But it allows you to go in and plug in some information about your environment, whether you're planning on staying with an all on-premises solution or if you're going to a cloud-based environment, or a mixture of the two, and then you enter in how many VMware hosts you have, what the average salary is for your virtualization engineers, and it will basically spit out what your payback period would be in order to do a migration. So some cases it's pretty quick, other cases it's 18 months or 2 years, but you'll be able to see that. It's quite handy. It's a really nice tool. Okay, so let's pretend you've already made the decision to look at migrating to Hyper-V. So what do you really have to do? Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to get a proper inventory of your systems. A lot of organizations that I talk to have no idea how many virtual machines that they have, or the virtual machines that they have have no idea what they're doing or what the proper scale is, and it's just virtual machines were requested, we built them, never turned them off, we never checked to see are they actually using all the resources that we scaled them to. Where we built them. Some developer or some database admin said, oh, this virtual machine needs 12 gig of RAM. We're configuring it for 12 gig of RAM. It needs 4 virtual CPUs, and that's the way it's always been. No one's ever checked up on it. So first thing you need to do is understand what your inventory is. Next thing you need to do is figure out if you need to right size the VM. So do you need to shrink that down? Let's say you built this out on a server environment that was 4 or 5 years old. I bought a server 4 years ago that I'm running VMware on. I scaled all my virtual machines based on that server's capability. Modern processors are so much quicker than the older servers that even though you had those systems on 4 virtual CPUs, you might only need 1 now. You might need only 2 cores now versus that. So you can shrink that down basically as you go to new hardware. And then you also need to identify the machines that are not supported to migrate. Now, right now, the systems that are not supported are systems running UEFI, because that's something VMware introduced a few years ago. But there is no current migration technology to go from a UEFI virtual machine in VMware to a Gen 2 Hyper-V virtual machine in Hyper-V. There's no direct migration path. You also need to look to see if you have any direct mapping on your storage. So if I have direct mapping saying I am taking my virtual machine and tying it physically to my LUN with basically no VMDK, then that can cause some issues as well. So you just need to work around that. Yes?
You said there's no mapping. Is that because it's secure?
Well, it's primarily just because the migration tools don't exist right now. Microsoft hasn't provided a super easy way to translate the types of virtual machines. Now, you also can't go from a VMware BIOS virtual machine to a Gen 2 virtual machine in Hyper-V. The reason why is because you've got different disk structures between the two, so you would have to reconfigure that along the way. But as Gen 2 virtual machines in Hyper-V matures a bit more, as more people see value in that, then you'll start to see more migration capabilities and more tools come out for that. So the tool that we use whenever we are doing inventory and right-sizing of virtual machines is a tool called MAP. How many have ever used or heard of MAP? Okay, a few of you. Okay. MAP is Microsoft Assessment and Planning. This was another one of the tools that came out of the Solution Accelerator team. It is a tool that allows you to check for readiness for many different platforms. If you need to check for readiness to move from, say, Server 2008 to 2012 R2, or if you need to check for readiness from, say, Windows XP to Windows 8, it can analyze your systems and come back and tell you what your readiness looks like with that. It can even look for things like Office version. So it's a pretty robust tool. It is an agentless tool, which is really nice. So it will go out and query things through WMI and pull back that information. It can also pull back performance counter information. So this is how you properly right-size your virtual machines. Is you can configure on this to say these are the machines that I want to monitor. And this is how long I want to run my data collection for, and this is how often I want to run my data collection for. And it will go out and monitor that and then spit back that information and show you. It's got some really nice reports as well that you can use to say, this is what my old hardware was on my old host system, this is what my new hardware is, and it will tell you that based on your new hardware capabilities, you can actually shrink the number of virtual processors, you can shrink the memory, and so forth. So I talked about this. It is a really simple download. You install it on a server, it runs with a database in the environment, then you basically run it, point it out to your systems. Now, are you going to want to run this against every server in your environment? Probably not. And you aren't going to say, I want to collect data every 5 minutes or every 30 seconds because you're going to overwhelm your servers because you're making WMI calls into those boxes and it has to respond to that. But it will give you some nice results. Now, I will say one thing about the MAP tool is it is not quite up to date. So it includes a It includes a report to check for VM readiness. And the report that it includes is based on an older version of the migration tools. So it will come back and say probably 90% of your virtual machines are not supported. If you're running like ESX 5 or 5.1 or 5.5, it's going to come back and say it's not supported. But that's not the case any longer. So here's the tool in a nutshell. Notice you can do analysis based on cloud. You can do analysis based on your desktop and server environment. So I'm going to click on my server environment. You can see some inventory information about this. I can see which machines are ready to migrate. If I click on server virtualization, I can say based on the number of virtual machines that I've inventoried, which it's just really simple environment. I had like 2 virtual machines. It'll tell me how many hosts I require, how many virtual machines I have, how many guests that I've scanned through this, and I can also run reports on this. So if I wanted to collect inventory data on this, I could just click on collect inventory data, point to an OU or a particular group of machines inside of Active Directory, and then I would specify how often I want to get that data, and it would go out and gather that information. So it's a pretty slick tool. All right. Okay. Let's get into migration now. So now that you've discovered your virtual machines, you've discovered, you've right-sized them, you know that, okay, I need to reduce the memory footprint, the processor footprint, I've built up my Hyper-V environment. And by the way, if you need some assistance building out a Hyper-V environment, there's a really nice tool called the PDT, or PowerShell Deployment Toolkit. There's also recently a GUI for that was released that allows you to build out a complete system center and Hyper-V environment, VMM, orchestrator, all the components in a fully automated fashion. So if you just want to stand up a lab really quick, I highly recommend that you go out and grab that PDT. It'll download all the bits, all the evaluation bits from Microsoft. It'll install it up. You can even go in and configure how many virtual machines you want it to run on, but it's pretty slick. We should probably do a session on PDT sometime. It would be pretty cool to do. So once you've got your private cloud infrastructure all built up, you're ready to convert. So what tools can you use in order to kick off and migrate? Recently, Microsoft released a tool called the Microsoft Virtual Machine Converter, or MVMC, and they released version 2.0 of that product. It is a GUI-based tool, allows you to walk through a wizard and basically choose which virtual machines that I want to migrate, and then go ahead and migrate those virtual machines. From a supported source and destination host, this is one of the biggest improvements with MVMC 2.0, is it fully supports everything from vCenter 4.1 all the way down to 5.5, same with EXX 4.1 all the way down to 5.5. If you're running older environments than that, unfortunately this tool will not help you. There are some other tools out there that could help you migrate, but most organizations are generally running 4.1. I do run into a few that were 3.5 or 3.4 of VMware. You can move this over to Windows Server 2008 R2 all the way up to 2012 R2, or you can move it directly into the cloud. So this migration tool will allow you to migrate from your VMware environment up to the Azure environment in the cloud. From a guest operating system version, it will basically run any one of these. So even down to the client level, notice all of the Unix operating systems as well. So this can migrate Unix workloads over to Hyper-V. In terms of virtual disk configurations, it really supports all of the possibilities in VMware. The only thing it does not support is direct mapping storage. So if you have direct mapping, you have to either create a VMDK out of that, or unmounted and then recreated on the Hyper-V side, essentially. So some additional requirements, you have to have write access to a UNC path. You need to have capacity on your Hyper-V side, obviously. You have to do some things like, if you don't disable the firewall, it's probably easier to disable the firewall, at least temporarily, or you can open up ports for RPC access and so forth. It should be domain joined. It's not necessarily have to be domain joined. It should be running. The reason why you want the VM running is because if it is running, the tool will go into that running machine and uninstall the VMware tools before it does the migration. If it is not running, it will just migrate it over, and then it's up to you to go in and remove the VMware tools afterwards. So. Okay. I want to talk about Azure. So how does this work? On your VMware environment, you've got your Linux and host VMs. You've got your Hyper-V environment where you're running NVMC. Now, when the migration, I just really don't like build slides. Just give me everything. All right, I can't. So the first thing you do is you connect into your VMware environment, and you select the target that you want to migrate. Then what it does is it creates a checkpoint. So it does a snapshot of your virtual machine, and it does a snapshot with quiesce mode, which quiesce mode means that it's grabbing everything in running memory and is flushing it to disk and grabbing that as a snapshot associated with that. Then it does the conversion. Now, and how it does the conversion is it uninstalls the VMware tools, shuts down the virtual machine, and then it does an OVF export. So it exports it from an OVF file on the VMware side, converts the disk, basically streams the disk over to a temporary directory on your migration server. Then what it does is it copies it to your Hyper-V location and then brings it up on the Hyper-V side. Now, it can be somewhat time-consuming depending on the size of your virtual machine, the size or the speed of your network, and the speed of your storage. On gigabit connectivity for about a 60 gig virtual machine or so, it takes me roughly about 20 minutes to do a migration. For larger virtual machines, it can take a bit longer. If you got 10 gigabit network between your environments, then it can bring that time down quite a bit. So this is a good way to migrate smaller virtual machines, definitely. And if you want to do larger ones, there are some ways that you can scale it out, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So it validates the disk is valid, adds it into Hyper-V. Or instead of going to Hyper-V, it can then at that point copy it up to Azure and configure Azure and bring it up and running in the Azure environment. So, right. So let me connect up to my trying to do it on kind of shrunk my system. No, stop it. All right. Okay, shrink. There. There we go. Okay. Okay. So this is my NVMC. So it is a pretty simple wizard utility. So the first thing it asks me is about my VMware environment. So I'm going to plug in some information. You can tell I used to work for Microsoft because all of my test environments still are contoso.com. This Microsoft could sue me for that if I, I doubt it. So now what it's doing is going out, connecting to my VMware environment and basically pulling back a list of virtual machines. Assuming I type the password right. There it goes. You can tell I've got a very complex environment. I've got one virtual machine in my environment right now. So, and I do have a little exclamation point. Oh, the machine's not turned on, so I can't migrate it. Well, we can fix that. Go into my VMware management tool. And let's go to, first let me go to my snapshots. Okay, go to, yes. Ran a migration test this morning to make sure everything was working, and I left it in the migrated state, so. Okay, I should be running now. Yep, okay. Let's go back. You can tell they really built it for one-off, because you can't rediscover. You have to launch the tool again. All right. Now you can go against either an individual ESX host, or you can go against your vCenter environment. If you go against your vCenter environment, it will expand out and find all of the machines across that data center, and then bring those up and show them in the list. Okay. I've got my server that I want to migrate. Just click on Next. What account do I want to use? I'll just use my existing account. It asked me, these are kind of confusing questions, but the final state of the source virtual machine. The source virtual machine being where it's at in VMware. So do I want to leave the machine on in VMware? Or do I want to turn it off? And then the final state of the destination would be on the Hyper-V side or Azure. Do you want to leave it on or off? So now it's going to go through and ask me about my host information and what I want to migrate. But I'm just looking at the time, and I've been talking quite a while. So, all right. Okay, so that is a GUI tool that helps you do the migration. However, if you're doing these on large scale, or if you want to do large amounts of migrations, you're not going to want to necessarily use a GUI tool. Microsoft released a tool called the Migration Automation Toolkit, or MAT. What MAT does is it's a series of PowerShell scripts that allows you to fully automate this migration process from discovery of the systems, and it stores it in a backend SQL Server Express database, to doing the migration, and it can spread the migration across workloads. And this one's a bit easier to see. So how it works is there is a control machine. The control machine reaches out to your vSphere environment and does a collection, and it stores that collection inside a SQL Server database. Now, it can be SQL Server Express or any number of existing databases that you have out there. Then what you do is you create a list. It's a really complicated list that you use good old Visual Notepad to do so. You just basically put in there the servers that you want to migrate, the virtual machines that you want to migrate. And then you kick off and run the conversion process, and the conversion process moves it over to Hyper-V. However, where the real power comes in is if you want to scale this. So if I want to migrate a lot of virtual machines, I can configure multiple helper servers. So you can do up to basically 3 to 5, depending on the speed of your helper machines, 3 to 5 migrations simultaneously, and then you can spread that across multiple machines. So this can speed up your migration time. It still uses MVMC on the back end. MVMC is basically has exposed a lot of PowerShell functionality, but it allows you to scale that out and spread it out and then automate the whole thing in an automated way. Now, your other option for doing migration is from a company called NetApp. And they have a tool called Project Shift. How many of you have NetApp in your environment today? Okay, a few of you. So with NetApp ONTAP controller 8.2.1 or later, they've introduced some really cool PowerShell functionality directly into the controller itself. And they've came up with a pretty ingenious way to do a migration to go from VMware to Hyper-V. Now, likewise, you can go from Hyper-V to VMware using the same method. But all it does is it literally manipulates the headers and streams the file using their controller logic to do the migration. Now, that sounds pretty technical, but let me just put it this way. You can migrate a virtual machine, no matter how large it is, in about 15 seconds. So I can have, and we were able to demonstrate this at TechEd this year, I can have a 2 terabyte virtual machine and literally convert it in 10 seconds. It's insanely fast in how it does that. Now, there's some steps that it takes because you still have to remove the VMware tools and all that stuff to prepare it, but the actual migration process is super quick. And so if you are looking to migrate from VMware, you can actually rent one of these units from NetApp, bring it on site, add it to your VMware environment as a NFS volume inside of VMware. You can add it to Hyper-V as an SMB share in Hyper-V, do your conversions all on that little NetApp controller box, and then live migrate it back to your production Hyper-V environment. So if you want to do your migrations very quickly, that is a really good solution for you to do so. Now, you don't have, the nice thing is you don't have to learn all of the commands that NetApp had to do in order to run that. There is a mat for Project Shift. So it's the same commands that you would run. Same discovery process. It stores it in the database. You can still have helpers, but you don't really need helpers in this case. But it will do the migration and actually grab all the network configuration. They've done a good job as well of making sure the volume information, the drive letters don't change and all that stuff. So when it migrates, it all comes over okay. So really good solution. Now, unfortunately, I cannot demo this because I don't have a NetApp hardware, but I can show you what mat looks like. And essentially, it looks the same. All right, let me minimize this. Go here. I've made this nice and big for you. Okay. So it's a pretty simple environment. So the first thing I'm going to do, because I don't know the state of the database I'm in, I'm going to clear out my existing database. Very helpful when you're testing. Now I want to collect. So I want to get a collection of all the virtual machines that are in my VMware environment. So I run my convert command with -collect on it. Now it's going out talking to my VMware environment and grabbing all of my virtual machines. All right, done the collection. Now I want to create a list. And what it did is it took all of the virtual machines in my environment and added it to a text file called vmlist.txt. Now, your environment would look much bigger than that, and what you don't want to do at this point is run a convert after you do that create list, because it would literally kick off and start converting every virtual machine in your environment. So the next thing I want to do is I want to update my database that says I'm ready to do the migration, and then to kick off a conversion, let's do a convert. Now the nice thing about this is no matter whether I'm running mat for NVMC or mat for Project Shift with NetApp, all those commands are exactly the same. Now how it works under the covers is drastically different, but all the commands are exactly the same. So I'm going to go ahead and kick this off and run it. So how this works is inside of an XML file, a variable.xml file, I've got a list of all my helper servers. So it will look across all my helper servers and say, do you have availability? And you configure to say how many queues you can do inside a given server, and the default is 3. So if there's availability on any of your helper servers, then it will find one that's got availability and kick off this process, and it's a scheduled task that runs all of that information locally, talks to the backend database, and does that. So now it's kicking off and running my conversion. So you might be wondering, Microsoft has these tools and NetApp has these tools, so what are you guys adding to this? So XTreme VM Migrator, we still said, okay, there's still a gap. The GUI tool, stop it. The GUI tool is great, but it's GUI based. It's not really scalable. You can't really automate a lot with it. The mat tool is great, but there's no real, you still have to have somebody sitting there manually kicking off PowerShell commands, waiting for the responses, waiting for the returns for those responses. So you still have to do that, and it's not GUI based at all, so you lose all of that functionality. So we said, well, is there a happy medium in between? So what we did was we created XTreme VM Migrator for NVMC. Now XTreme VM Migrator basically runs through the same process. The key difference is we've built an orchestrator integration pack that runs in System Center Orchestrator with our own actions that will allow you to manage this whole process end-to-end using System Center Orchestrator. So you can kick off and run the migration, schedule the migration. You can watch the output of each one of the steps. You can tie it into your change management systems. And so you could say, I want to use ServiceNow or Service Desk Manager, and kick off a change approval process to say, okay, when this occurs, go ahead and kick off and run this, and when it's finished, go ahead and update my change management system to say the migration is complete, and here were the results. So we've built basically a complete automation infrastructure around Microsoft's tools. Now how we work is we've got our orchestrator integration pack has a series of actions. And our actions allow you to do things, and that just looks horrible. Let me zoom in. So up here in the upper left, these are all of the actions that we include out of the box. So things like checking the database for different functionality, collecting the virtual machines, configuring the settings. So all of the stuff that you had to enter into that XML file to configure everything for mat, you can all do through this action inside of Orchestrator. running the conversion, generating reports at the end of the migration showing, okay, what converted, what's not compatible for conversion, listing all the virtual machines, killing the database, resetting the status, and updating the database. So if I wanted a complete inventory of my machines and I wanted to see which machines were not compatible, I've got 3 steps: configuring my settings to point to my environment, collecting the virtual machines, and then kicking out a report at the end. If I want to do a complete migration of my entire data center, this is your orchestrator run book that would do that. So it would go through, it would configure your settings. I do this because I run a lot of tests, but kill the database, collect all the virtual machines, create a list out of that, update my database, look to see if I have machines that are ready to convert. If so, go ahead and continue on, run the conversion, kick off, sleep for a little bit, check to see if the conversions are still running, and then generating a report at the very end. Now, we also have tied in, we found some gaps with the MAT tool. And one of the gaps that it had was, if you're using MAT for NVMC, it does not migrate the NIC settings. So if you've got static IP addresses set on your virtual machines, that does not come over properly. So we've worked with the MAT team and we've added that functionality back into the MAT toolkit. So we've added that into our own kind of fork, if you will, of the MAT tool. So we will get all of the machine information. We've also got the capability as well to set up virtualized networking in VMM when the migration completes. So tying it into the correct VLAN, tying it into the correct virtual switch, and so forth in VMM. So we can manage all of that through the same orchestrator runbook. Just to show you what that looks like. Okay. I'll go here to my orchestrator server. And it looks pretty similar to what I showed you earlier. So this is a shortened down version of my conversion process, my migration process. So configuring my settings, collecting my virtual machines, listing them, updating the database, doing a quick check to make sure that there's something to convert, and then kicking off and running in the conversion. Now each one of these steps have their own output that check for success or failure or grab information about the migration process and feeds it into the orchestrator pipeline. So you can query off that, you can feed off of that, you can tie that into your own workflows. Say if you already have a workflow that checks for the change management approval inside of Service Manager or ServiceNow or any other products that you might have, you can tie that into this workflow as well. And then kick off and do your migrations with approval. So to do this migration, I could literally check it in, click run, and I would be done. So that is our solution in a nutshell, and a little bit about migration from virtual machines. Like I said, it's really worth your while. There's a large number of you that are running VMware in your environment today. It's really worth your while to look at Hyper-V from both a cost avoidance. We're not even talking about cost savings. We're talking about cost avoidance. Generally, what we recommend customers to do is take a look at your support contracts. If you renewed, recently, that's great. Keep on to that, but whenever times come to renew again, stop paying maintenance. So generally maintenance for a good sized organization is somewhere between $150,000 to $500,000 a year in maintenance, yearly maintenance costs for VMware. Stop paying it. Then use that money that you would have paid for that and do your migration over to the Hyper-V side. Because generally you can pay for your entire migration process with just the amount of money that you would have paid on maintenance for 1 year. So just something to be aware of. All right. But thank you all very much. Enjoy the lunch today. I think we got Taco Deli, so it'll be good. So, all right.